Hello, bookworms! Today I'm going to be sharing my March wrap-up with you. This was a very unusual reading month, so I feel like it only makes sense to wrap things up in an unusual way from what I've been doing so far. I ended up reading like a ton of Star Wars comics this month. I was really struggling on focusing on reading after everything that happened at the end of February, so I just was like craving something comforting and entertaining, and that's really like what I was looking for and what I found in those Star Wars comics. They kind of helped me get through a tough time, and then by the end of the month I was back into the groove of reading novels again. I ended up reading a total of 16 books this month, and 12 of those were Star Wars graphic novels. So instead of wrapping things up in order of star ratings like I have been, I'm gonna first wrap up the novels that I read, and then I'll move into the Star Wars comics. First up is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have been so excited to read this book. Taylor's other book, Daisy Jones and the Six, ended up being one of my favorite books of 2019, and I've been very highly anticipating her next one. This one's actually connected to the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. We're following the children of Mick Riva, who is one of the, I believe, husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I haven't actually read that one yet, but I was pretty sure in this book when I got to the point where I was like, okay, that must have been Evelyn that they were referencing. This book doesn't come out until June 1st, so there's still a little bit of a wait for it, but like I said, I just could not wait to pick this one up. Before I started the novel, I was under the impression that this book takes place entirely in one day, and it's chronicling everything that happens starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and going until 7 o'clock the next morning. It's all of the events leading up to the infamous end of summer party that the Riva children hold every year. But upon starting reading, I found out that yes, that is the case, although there are also dual timelines in here. So interspersed between those hour markers, we also find out the story of Mick and June Riva starting in the 1950s and then leading all the way up until the 1980s and to present day in 1983 when this party takes place. So there are 4 children in all, and they've had a very rocky childhood, which you get to experience through those flashbacks. The children's names are Nina, Jay, Hud, and Kit, with Nina being the oldest and really needing to step into the mother role after a lot of the difficulties that they were facing. And that was one of the things that was like truly a standout for me in this book. I felt like the sibling relationship between all 4 of them was just absolutely incredible. I loved how close they were. They had that kind of closeness that you can only have with someone who's experienced the exact same thing as you. And I just loved like how there for each other they were. When we start off the book, a lot of them do have secrets that they are hiding, and it does come to a point, obviously, where they end up getting revealed. They're not necessarily things that everybody else would be happy to find out, but there's still like that such love for one another that I thought it was just executed very well, and I really enjoyed it. Honestly, the relationship between all of them, coupled with my curiosity as to why this mansion would end up in flames by the end of the night, is really what kept me going throughout the whole book. I was definitely interested. I was always excited to pick this up and to find out what was going to happen next in both timelines. I love that it's set against a 1980s Malibu, Californian backdrop, so it's got very beachy vibes, and we're also following a lot of people that are in the entertainment industry, so whether that be sports or modeling, and then there are also people that are involved in Hollywood and rock stars, and it just was that kind of like fascination with self-destructive rich people kind of story that I tend to really enjoy. I will say that Malibu Rising is not the most uplifting of reads, but I do feel like the ending was hopeful, which I definitely appreciated. And regardless, I really enjoyed my time reading this book, and I really like the Riva siblings. I just like felt for them so strongly, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Then I read How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. This is a new nonfiction book that just came out, and it's all about climate change and how that is affecting our Earth and what we need to do in order to try to change things so that we can avoid a disaster. I think Bill Gates did a really good job of clearly and concisely explaining exactly how climate change is affecting our Earth and also laying out everything that we need to do in order to fix it. Throughout the book, he constantly acknowledges that he is a privileged, very wealthy man, and he has much more of an ability than the average person to fund some of these solutions that he is saying are the right way to go. And he does speak openly about how much money he has donated to certain things. He also makes a very strong case for how there's very little that the individual can do to try to help combat climate change. It's really something that's going to need to be implemented by governments, and not just like the US government, but worldwide. We need all governments to be on board, and we also need like big businesses that have the capital to invest in those things, which is tricky because there's not any short-term payoff. It would definitely be like a very long game. And he talks about how even companies who have made investments in these kind of advancements can end up losing like those tax breaks that they've been offered if a new administration comes in and just changes all of the laws. So it's really tough to get companies interested in investing in climate change. In the book, Bill Gates argues that in order to save our planet, we need to get our carbon emission rate to a net zero. So we need to be able to do things to offset everything that is causing carbon emissions. And he also makes a point that developing countries shouldn't be denied the same kinds of amenities that we have in place, like the United States, where everyone has like electricity, like things that improve people's lives. Everyone should have access to those things, but we still should be able to offset those emissions by doing other things. He lays out a very ambitious plan, and he does acknowledge how difficult it will be to implement, but the tone of the book is hopeful. Like, he truly believes that this is something that we can do if we all come together and actually like do it. Before I read this, I had a very basic understanding of climate change. In this, he really dives into facts and figures and tells you like exactly what it is that is happening and exactly why certain steps aren't taken to fix things. He's clearly very passionate and knowledgeable about the subject, and it was really enjoyable to hear about it from someone who is genuinely interested in just making things better. So overall, I really enjoyed this one. I felt like I learned a lot from it, and I think I'm actually going to pass it along to my brother because I think that he will enjoy it as well. And I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Next, I have a reread, and that is The Hobbit by Tolkien. This was a really fun and comforting reread for me. I've been wanting to reread the Lord of the Rings trilogy for a really long time, but I decided that I'm definitely going to do it this year, and I thought that it would be good to just start with The Hobbit. It's been so many years since I read this book. Like, it's probably been like 15 years, which makes me sound like I'm 100 years old. But since it's been so long, I would say that my memory was kind of clouded about the story and about my nostalgic memory of it. I'm sure everyone knows, but just in case you don't, The Hobbit tells the story of Bilbo Baggins and his adventure with the dwarves, how he acquired the One Ring, and his run-in with the dragon Smaug. The Hobbit is full of humor, beautiful poetry, and really fun riddles. This is where my memory failed me. So as a kid, I always thought that I liked The Hobbit better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it's because The Hobbit was such like a quick-paced adventure story, and it was just fun, and there was so much that was happening. Whereas Lord of the Rings is definitely a much slower read. But as an adult, I'm realizing that I actually like the Lord of the Rings trilogy way more than I like The Hobbit. And it's because the Lord of the Rings is a lot slower and more character driven, and we have more time to like absorb everything that's going on and really dive into all of the details of the different aspects of the story. My last reread of Fellowship of the Ring was about 5 years ago, so I'm really looking forward to reading it again. But just from that last reread, I can already confidently say that I definitely like Lord of the Rings better than The Hobbit. And to be honest, that was kind of a shocking revelation for me because I always thought that I liked The Hobbit better, but it's just that it's been so long and I've clearly changed as a reader. Andrew and I actually ended up marathoning all of the Lord of the Rings movies over the past week after I finished my Hobbit reread, and it was so enjoyable, and now I'm just like even more excited to start my reread of the main series. And I obviously gave this book 5 stars. And then the last novel that I read is actually a Star Wars novel, and that is Last Shot by Daniel Jose Older. This is a Han and Lando story, and it was so much fun. The story takes place in 3 parts. So we get one part following Lando, and that part takes place prior to the movie Solo. Then we get another part of the story in flashbacks that involve Han and Chewie, and those take place between Solo and A New Hope. And then we also get a present timeline, which takes place after Return of the Jedi. In this novel, we have our introduction to Sana Starros, who is a character that showed up in a lot of the comics that I read later in the month. I really enjoyed this one. The big overarching story that we have here is that it's basically a team up between Lando and Han, who are trying to take down the villain Pfizer Gore. Pfizer Gore is trying to take over the universe by basically hacking droids and using them to murder people. Unsurprisingly, some of my favorite scenes involved Han and Leia, or Han, Leia, and Ben. Leia is just obviously like an all-time favorite character, so anything with her is just delightful to me. I also really enjoyed the inner monologue that Han would have about his insecurities of being a father. We also get to see a baby Ben Solo, which is just really funny looking back. I also just really appreciated getting so much Lando and getting to be inside of Lando's head. He's such a great character. It was really nice to see him have a spotlight in this book. If I had to describe this in one word, just like I said in the beginning, it would be fun. This book was just a really entertaining, like, buddy adventure story, and I would definitely recommend it for anybody looking to start reading Star Wars novels. I think this is probably a good place to do so. And it's also quite different than any of the other canon books that I've read so far, which I really appreciated. And I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. And that's it for the novels. So now I'm going to jump into the Star Wars comics that I read. For these, I'm going to wrap them up in the order that I read them versus what I enjoyed most, because a lot of them are part of series, and I feel like it would be confusing to go from, like, to jump within series to different volumes. Everything here primarily takes place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, but there are some volumes that did have like flashback stories that'll take place before anything, but for the most part everything takes place in that time frame. Just so it's not confusing, the Star Wars title has since been rebooted back to issue number 1. They told a complete story in the Star Wars main title taking place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and now they've decided to go back, start at issue 1, and tell a complete story between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So I haven't gotten into those yet. I'm talking about the first volumes of Star Wars that's within canon. And just in case you're curious, I always buy my Star Wars comics on Comixology whenever they have Marvel sales. I find that you can get Star Wars graphic novels for a pretty deep discount. The next sale, I'm sure, is going to be May the 4th. They'll have something big going on then, and I'll probably fill out my collection with the ones that I'm missing. But that is a really good time to pick them up because it's just so much cheaper than if you were to buy them full price. And then my last caveat before I finally get into talking about these is that I was genuinely reading these for comfort and entertainment, so I didn't really have like my critical reading cap on. It was just, these were just fun for me, so I'm really going to talk about like main plot points and whether I enjoyed it or not without getting too deep about things. So the first one that I read is Star Wars Volume 2, Shadows on the Smuggler's Moon. This one takes place on Sharnada, which is the Smuggler's Moon. Luke is doing everything that he can to try to learn more about the Jedi, but he ends up being captured and his lightsaber is taken away. Meanwhile, Han and Leia are trying to evade capture by Imperials who have been set on their trail by someone from Han's past. Overall, I liked this volume a lot. I think that the beginning volumes of the Star Wars mainline comics are really strong, but it does tend to dip a little bit for me, though from what I've heard it picks back up again toward the end. I think that they did some experimental things toward the middle. I think the beginning volumes are a lot stronger than some of the later ones. Then I read Darth Vader Volume 2, Shadows and Secrets, and I have to say, I find that I actually enjoy the Darth Vader comics more than the Star Wars mainline comics, which totally surprises me, but it's just the way it is. In this one, Vader travels to Tatooine in order to seek out information about Luke, and he is alongside one of my absolute favorite characters to be introduced into the Star Wars universe, and that is Dr. Aphra, who is a very morally gray archaeologist that tends to work with Vader pretty often. She has 2 murder droids. Their name are 000 and BT-1, and they are basically like the dark versions of C-3PO and R2-D2. They are so much fun. I love 000 so much. So Aphra, 000, and BT plan this heist against the Imperials because Darth Vader needs to get credits, and Aphra is the one that is on the case because it needs to look like an accident versus a robbery. So then Dr. Aphra actually employs the help of some bounty hunters, which includes another character that I really like, and that is Black Chrysanthemum, which is basically like a dark Chewbacca. So overall, I really enjoyed this one. It was like a really fun heist story, and we also got to meet a new sort of antagonistic character toward Darth Vader. Very good. Highly recommend this series. I read these in canon order, so that's why I'm jumping between series, because a lot of them were released around the same time, and I wanted to like make sure that the story would make sense. So that's why it might seem like I'm jumping around a little bit. But the next volume that I read is Star Wars Vader Down, which is basically a crossover between the Star Wars mainline comics and the Darth Vader comics. In this one, Darth Vader is following intel that Dr. Aphra gave him, which basically leads him to Vorgus Voss, where he believes that Luke Skywalker is, and he is, along with 3 other X-Wing squadrons. Luke is there because Vorgus Voss had an old Jedi temple, and he's still continuing to try to learn more about the Jedi since he has 0 training at all at this point. Then Princess Leia finds out that Vader is there, and she decides that they need to take him down, and she is not very concerned with rescuing Luke, so Han kind of takes it upon himself to venture out in the Millennium Falcon and try to save Luke since Leia is so focused on Vader. But he does not realize that Vader is not alone. Vader's actually there with Dr. Aphra, BT, and 000. I thought this was a really good crossover. I liked how it brought both elements from both stories into one cohesive tale, and I thought that it wrapped up really nicely. Then I read Star Wars Volume 3, Rebel Jail. So this one takes place in the aftermath of Vader Down, and we have Leia transporting a captive from that storyline on Vader Down to Sunspot Prison, which is like a very secret rebel jail. Complications ensue, so that's an entertaining story. And then we also have Han and Luke who are going out to try to buy supplies for the rebellion, but Han gambles all of the money away in a game of sabacc, and then Luke has to try to take it into his own hands to try to get those funds back. And then also in this volume, we get the Star Wars Annual #1, which is kind of like a one-shot story. And we're following Therius Demo. He's a seemingly devoted Imperial officer that's been doing his job for years, but people don't know that he is actually secretly a rebel spy named Eneb Ray. And this story just chronicles one of his adventures where he's been sent on a mission by Princess Leia that he has to do, and it doesn't end so well for him. But I was really invested. I was surprised that I got so interested in a character that I knew nothing about going into it. Like, he was totally new for me, and I just immediately felt invested in his story. Then I read Darth Vader Volume 3, The Shu-Torun War. This is probably my least favorite story arc in the Vader comics, but I do feel like it is stronger than some of the Star Wars mainline novels. So despite it being my least favorite Vader story, I do think it's better than some of the other graphic novels. In this one, Darth Vader travels to a planet named Shu-Torun. They are very rich in ore, which the Empire needs, but the planet has kind of decided to rebel against the Empire, and Darth Vader has to go and kind of put everyone in their place so that that doesn't happen again. One of the biggest parts of Shu-Torun culture is that dancing is very important to them, and Vader basically insults them when he doesn't want to dance. He gets into a very big tiff with the current monarchy. Oh, and he also travels there with Silo, who is like a cyborg scientist that does not like Vader. So he's technically supposed to be there in order to help Vader quash this rebellion, but his ultimate goal is to make Vader look bad. So again, very entertaining story. I liked the ending of it a lot, but I didn't think it was as strong as some of the earlier ones. Then I read Darth Vader Volume 4, End of Games. And this volume I definitely enjoyed a lot more again, and I think it's because we got more Dr. Aphra and BT and 000. This is actually also the conclusion to this Vader series, and I felt like everything wrapped up in a very satisfying way. I liked that they told a complete, cohesive story. Then I read Star Wars Volume 4, Last Flight of the Harbinger, and this I thought was really fun. Luke and Leia come up with this crazy idea of stealing an Imperial starship and using that for the rebellion. I'm fairly certain it was this one, but in the beginning of the book, they're telling Mon Mothma their plan, and Mon Mothma is like, if anyone else suggested this, I would be like, no. But since it's you two, fine. So obviously things don't go as planned when they are on board to try to take over the Harbinger. Creel and the Scar Squad, which is a faction of stormtroopers, show up and try to mess things up for them. This one I did enjoy. I think, again, it was another heist story, and I think I tend to really enjoy the heist stories within the Star Wars universe. Okay, then next I read Star Wars The Screaming Citadel, which is hands down my favorite Star Wars comic that I have ever read, ever, like not just in this video, but overall anything. This is a much darker story, and I think that if you're a fan of like the Night Sisters like I am, you'll also really enjoy this story. This is another kind of crossover, and in this one we have Luke and Dr. Aphra teaming up, and they're going to the Citadel of Catanthan in order to meet with the Queen. The Queen hosts this event one time per year where she will meet with anybody who brings her an oddity, and whichever oddity intrigues her the most, she'll grant a favor to the person who brought that with them. So Aphra is going with Luke as her oddity. So each of them has their own objective, and despite teaming up, they really can't trust one another. Luke is obviously a little bit more trusting than Aphra, and Aphra is not someone that anyone should really trust. So they end up getting into this giant mess, and they need the help of all of their other companions in order to make it out alive. I loved it. I loved every single character's role in this story. And I also really liked the whole story of everything going on at the Citadel. It's the Citadel of Catanthan, which translates to the Screaming Citadel. And it was almost like a horror story within the Star Wars universe. So if that's something that sounds intriguing to you, I would highly, highly recommend this one. Then I read Dr. Aphra Volume 2, which is Dr. Aphra and the Enormous Prophet. In this one, Dr. Aphra is holding an auction in order to make a lot of credits selling off a Jedi artifact. So basically she invites all of like the scummiest people in the galaxy to come and bid on this object, and obviously things do not go as smoothly as planned. This one again was really entertaining. I very much enjoyed it, and I really love Dr. Aphra. Then I read Star Wars Volume 5, Yoda's Secret War, and this is one of the ones that I really did not enjoy. This is actually a flashback story, but I don't know if I said this, but earlier on, Luke found a journal of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's reading stories of things that happened in Jedi pasts, so he doesn't actually know that this is Yoda, but they frame this story as Luke reading the journal, so it's like still taking place in the present timeline, despite the actual story taking place prior to Phantom Menace. In this one, Yoda is on this like Lord of the Flies-esque planet, and there's something sinister happening in the heart of the mountain, so he is determined to figure out what it is and to kind of reunite these like brutal children with their families. I truly was not really invested in the story, and it really overall just wasn't very memorable for me. I definitely prefer the stories that take place in the current timeline. Then I read Star Wars Volume 6, Out Among the Stars. This one was a little bit better for me, but still didn't capture what I loved about the earlier stories. I think that this kind of took place between story arcs. So instead of getting a story told over however many issues are included, this one was kind of like reading a whole bunch of one-shots that focused primarily on a particular character. So we get a Luke and Leia story, we get a Sana and Lando story, we get a Han and Chewie story, we get an R2-D2 and C-3PO story, and then we also get a Scar Squadron story. So I liked it, but didn't love it. And then the final Star Wars comic that I read this month was Dr. Aphra Volume 3 Remastered. This volume is kind of a complete departure from how we've come to know Dr. Aphra and her murder droids. The tables have turned and 000 is now in charge. So things get crazy. I didn't like this one as much as the second volume, but I do like the new romantic relationship that was introduced in this story. Ooh, and now I'm struggling to remember if it was this volume or the last volume of Dr. Aphra where one of my favorite Star Wars Rebels characters showed up, so that was a treat. But that was everything that I read this month. I know this was kind of a different wrap-up. I've definitely gotten back into like the groove of reading novels and being able to focus, which has been a blessing. So my April wrap-up will look very different than this one, but it was fun to have something different for a change. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully it'll inspire you to pick up some Star Wars comics. I do think that they are really fun supplements to the story, and they're characters that I love, so I enjoy seeing all of the storylines with them. Let me know your favorite thing that you read in March, and that's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!